Rotation is right around the corner, coming into effect on April 11th, 2025. So today we're going to be going over every important competitive card you need to have in your collection in order to build decks in the new format. Let's kick things off with the consistency supporter cards, and we have the bread and butter best 3 in format right now. Professor's research is a big dig into the deck, seeing 7 additional cards is fantastic, and there are still many archetypes that require some discard synergy. There's INO, which is our key disruptive supporter in the format. It's good in the opening turns, seeing a decent amount of fresh cards before you start taking prize cards, but crucially, it will put your opponent down to lower hand sizes towards the later stages of the game to make it harder for them to find their final few combinations to win the game. Arven is also a really important supporter card. Even with Rotation and Forest Hill Stone exiting our format, it's still really important for many evolution-based decks to find that TM evolution to get going very early, and many decks will be choosing to go second because of that, and build fully around this Arven supporter. At the same time, it can also cherry pick some really important item cards, and of course, many A-specs are items as well, so Arven is still going to be a focal point. Sort of the next kind of most interesting and best supporters after the big 3 include Judge, which is another disruption-based supporter, a little bit more proactive in its disruption, in that it can be more annoying earlier on in the game than an INO, but then slightly weaker in the sort of mid to late game in comparison. The Cypher Maniac's code breaking isn't really a draw supporter per se, but combined with other draw style abilities in particular, you can still put critical cards to the top of your deck and then find access to them via your abilities. And the Morty's Conviction doesn't force you to discard your entire hand, which allows you to have additional discard synergy in your deck, but not necessarily have to dump everything. So if you're trying to accumulate combinations, this could still be a really good choice. Following on from that, we have Carmine, which is a supporter card, not quite as strong as Professor's Research. You see 2 less cards, but if you go first, you can use it on your first turn. So this can be really nice for some explosive early games. There's a lot of sort of turbo engine cards to Rotation, so Carmine might be coming into effect a little bit more frequently. The Explorer's Guidance also allows some extra discard synergy within your deck. Looking at the top 6, you get to keep 2 of them. That's a fairly deep dig into the deck, and you discard a large portion of cards as well, which sometimes can be an upside. And don't forget that this is an ancient supporter card, which might be important for some ancient style archetypes that are still staying in rotation. And then we have the Surfer supporter card. It's not seen a huge amount of play, but stapling a switching effect onto any supporter card is still generally quite powerful, especially in an era with Budu providing item lock. Having a supporter means of getting around that lock, especially if your opponent's attempting a trapping strategy, is quite handy, and it can top up on cards. There's already a few decks that I've tried to incorporate the Surfer in, much more so than I would have in the previous format. Then we move on to a couple of interesting searching style supporters. The Jacques supporter allows you to search your deck for 2 evolutions and put them into your hand, and the Cyrano supporter allows you to search for 3 Pokemon EX and put them directly into your hand. These are both decent supporter options that could go alongside or instead of some of your ball search cards. And then we end on a suite of interesting, not quite good enough style supporters that might end up bolstering your overall supporter counts. Once you've already put in a decent amount of those researches, INO, Arven, that sort of thing, if there's nothing better, or if there's a specific way you're building a deck that can make these cards powerful, they might be worth considering. Hassle's pretty decent for single prize decks, because you have many more opportunities for you to have suffered a KO and then utilize this effect, cherry picking crucial cards from your deck. Drayton can pick an interesting combination of trainer and Pokemon cards, could be decent for some rare candy style engines. Larry's skill is a really painful downside in that you discard your entire hand, but it can cherry pick some critical pieces. I think we're just sort of waiting for a decent deck to make this card strong. Kofu, interestingly, has popped up in a few competitive archetypes in the past, so could do once again. And Grusher has a pretty difficult condition to meet, but is a powerful draw supporter if ever you are able to build your deck in that sort of way. And then we have the quantity of cards I think you should pick up in this category for the consistency supporters. This is a great time for you to pause and screenshot before we move on to the utility supporters. Starting off with the big ones then, we have Boss's Orders, which allows us to pick off your opponent's bench Pokemon. It's critical to the TCG right now. This is going to be in the majority of decks in the format. And then we have the Professor Churro Scenario and Penny supporters, which can pick up Pokemon off of our bench. That means we can remove damaged Pokemon, or we could remove those easy to KO multi-prize Pokemon to make it more difficult for your opponent to take those 6 prize cards. Next up, we have the energy acceleration options. Professor Sada's Vitality actually could be considered somewhat of a consistency card in its own right, because it does still have a draw 3 staple to it, but its primary function is to help power up some ancient Pokemon. Crispin is that universal energy acceleration option that we have in the game right now. Many archetypes are looking towards this to get that extra attachment in. And the Janine's Secret Art only works for Dark-type Pokemon, but is some powerful energy acceleration, and surprisingly that poison can be considered an upside in a lot of situations, because in format we do have some damage modifications that are unlocked when you poison your own Pokemon. A couple more options to do with energy then, we have the Mela and Poppy supporters. Mela is only accelerating basic fire energy, and you have to have suffered a KO on the previous turn, but it can top you up to 6 cards, which is reasonable. And Poppy is 2 energy switches put into 1 card. Of course, it's a supporter effect, so you have to time this correctly, but can allow you to do some shenanigans with possibly some Pokemon that find it easier to attach energy onto themselves, and then pop it onto some Pokemon that may find it a little bit trickier to do so. Next, we move on to some Pokemon recovery options in supporter form. Lana's Aid can get 3 of any combination of non-rule box Pokemon and basic energy straight into the hand, which is quite powerful. Miriam is shuffling Pokemon back into the deck, but then you do get that beneficial draw 3 at times. And then Tulip, quite a powerful effect, but only applies to psychic Pokemon and basic psychic energy. We end on some damage modifiers and the Briar supporter card, which can be very powerful if you're playing a Terrestrial archetype, allowing you to take an additional prize card when you score a KO, if the opponent has 2 prize cards remaining. The Black Belt's Training is a nice damage modifier, whereas the Kirin does 10 damage less, but has the utility of also allowing you to have an additional switching card in your deck, once again in supporter form. And once again, another opportunity to take your screenshots before we move on to more utility supporters. Now we move on to some disruptive options. We have the Eerie supporter, as well as the Zerosix Machinations. Both of these are trying to attack your opponent's hand, where the area is selecting crucial item cards that you find there, whereas the Zerosic gives your opponent more control, but is forcing them down to a lower hand size. Then we have some energy disruption supporters, the Giovanni's Charisma, the Giacomo, which is only for special energy cards, and finally the Team Star Grunt, which isn't quite removal, but is still forcing your opponent back in tempo in terms of attachments. Then we move on to some other frustrating ones. The Erica's Invitation can force Pokemon out of the opponent's hand and then into the active spots. The Lys's Appeal is typically less powerful than a Boss's Orders because it's only targeting basic Pokemon, but it does have that upside of confusion, which might be relevant if you're trying to avoid getting KO'd on a number of turns. And then the Rhyme Supporter, again, not as powerful as a Boss's Orders, of course, because your opponent chooses the new active Pokemon to be promoted, but it is put onto a draw 3 option, and if you're having lots of trapping opportunities within your deck, sometimes simply pushing something out of the active is a good enough effect, and Rhyme can still make it into some disruptive decks. And then I didn't really know where to put Salvatore, so I just stuck him on the end here. Not necessarily a disruptive option, but it can allow us to evolve immediately into a Pokemon that does not have abilities, a turn faster than you otherwise would be able to. So this could end up being a combo enabler, especially if there are some important Stage 1 attacking Pokemon that don't have abilities that you want to brute force out as quickly as possible to get an attack effect off or get some nice damage in early on in the game. Pause now if you want to see the counts that I recommend, but let's move on to our item cards. Starting off with the searching options we have in the game then, the bread and butter is the Buddy Buddy Poffin, the Ultra Ball, and the Nest Ball. These are going to be essential and core to basically every deck that we make in the format right now. The Buddy Buddy Poffin being the most specific of the bunch because it's only targeting 70 hit points or less Pokemon, but it can allow you to get 2 Pokemon for the price of 1 card, which is a really, really nice upside. Then we have the sort of slightly weaker Ball Search cards that can sometimes make it into decks that really want to have some extra reach. The Great Ball is looking at the top 7, whereas the Dust Ball looks at the bottom 7. But ultimately both function quite similarly. Then we have some ace specs as well, the Precious Trolley, the Master Ball, and the Hyper Aroma. Trolley can really let you go wide on opening turns, and that's really going to lean towards an Arvan engine more than likely. The Master Ball surprisingly has seen play in previous formats, just for being a very flexible option, whereas the Hyper Aroma can get you 3 Stage 1s immediately, and we know there are some very powerful Stage 1 abilities in the format that you might want to cherry pick immediately. And then for some more Pokemon specific search options, we have the Terra Orb, the Techno Radar, and the Bug Catching sets. These are by no means universally strong options, but the decks that can utilize these effects are very powerful. Seeing as though we've mentioned a handful of ace specs already, let's cross off a bunch of the other item A specs. We have the Unfair Stamp, the Prime Catcher, Secret Box, Scoop Up Cyclone, Max Rod, Energy Search Pro, Poker Vital A, Scramble Switch, Brilliant Blender, and Miracle Headset. All of these have really creative, wacky effects, and some of them you can build around your deck list based on the A spec you have within your deck to get really powerful upsides. I think typically the Unfair Stamp, the Prime Catcher, and even the Secret Box, these are the sort of most universal item A specs that we have in the game. Unfair Stamp being great disruption, Prime Catcher being a great gusting opportunity, and the Secret Box can get a lot of value just from one card and adds to the consistency within your deck. But a handful of these other A specs are critical to specific decks and how they operate. For example, the Energy Search Pro could be fantastic for Golden Go, the Brilliant Blender could be fantastic for Ceruledge, or even the New Age God of War EX builds. So they're all worth picking up one-ofs because you want to have access to the correct A spec when you need it for whatever archetype comes out, or if there's a new way to play one of the top decks in the game. Let's move on to some more utility items then. We have some good energy searching cards, we have energy recovery cards, we have a combination of energy and Pokemon recovery in item form, we have switching effects, Rare Candy can get us straight into stage 2s, Counter Catcher can be more gusting from an item when we're behind, we have Pal Pad which can recover supporters, and then Poker Gear and Call Bell which can find supporter cards, and then we have the energy acceleration options in the item form of Energy Sticker, which is coin flips, Glass Trumpet, which is only for colorless Pokemon as long as you have a Terra in play, and Electric Generator, which is good for our basic lightning Pokemon. For almost all of these, I think it's worth just getting 4 off copies. I think only Energy Search is the one where I think only 2 is sufficient, because if you really need high counts, you would just go for the Earthen Vessel instead for additional value within your deck. There are more utility items to go over though. Pokemon Catcher is a coin flip gusting effect, and then we have a handful of the disruption cards to consider as well. Boxed Order does force you to end your turn, so it isn't great for attacking archetypes, but in some of these slower, more methodical walling style decks, you can actually sacrifice an attack for a turn in order to accumulate some combinations. The Accompanying Flute can force Pokemon onto the field. Hand Trimmer and Grabber are once again trying to affect your opponent's hand and disrupt them, whereas the Enhanced and Crushing Hammer are trying to remove energy from play. In this instance, I think it's worth picking up playsets of all of these cards. Onto Pokemon tools then, we'll start off the ones that sort of manipulate energy. Countergain and the Sparkling Crystal A-Spec both reduce the amount of energy you require to attack. EXP Share can move energies off KO'd Pokemon onto others in the back. The Power Glass can end our turn by attaching energy to some of our Pokemon, similar to the Turbo Energize, but that's going towards our benched Pokemon. And Heavy Baton is like an EXP Share, but you can get a whole heap of energy going back from your KO'd active Pokemon, provided it's a 4 retreat cost Pokemon. Then we have some great damage mods in the format. Another A-Spec, the Maximum Belt, which is a plus 50 damage mod. Binding Mochi is a plus 40 if your own Pokemon is poisoned. Defiance Band is 30 damage if you're behind. Vitality Band is a no questions asked plus 10, and the Future Boost Energy Capsule allows you to have free retreat as well as a plus 20 damage mod, but it's only on your future Pokemon. Then we have our hit point buffing and tanking tools. Once again, a couple A-Specs to talk about here. Hero's Cape is a plus 100 hit points. The Survival Brace, as long as you have full hit points, you cannot be KO'd. Instead, you go down to 10 hit points remaining. Ancient Boost Energy Capsule, only useful for ancient Pokemon. Luxurious Cape is another plus 100 hit point buff, but your Pokemon give up an extra prize. Bravery Charm, plus 50 for basics. Rigid Band for stage 1s is a minus 30, Defiance Vest is a minus 40 if you have more prize cards remaining, and the Rock Chestplate, just for the fighting Pokemon, once again can allow you to be a little bit tankier. We have a couple of important technical machines, Evolution and Devolution. We have the Rescue Board, which is nice for mobility. We have some disruptive tools with the Handheld Fan and the Gravity Gemstone, and then a couple more A-Specs, the Amulet of Hope and Deluxe Bomb. Haven't seen too much play just yet, but are still worth picking up, I think. And then here are the counts of the cards that I think are worth picking up. With Arvenin formats, many of these can find their way within decks, even as low counts, because you can cherry pick them for the right occasion. Moving on to stadium cards then, we have Artisan, great for consistency, Area Zero Underdepths, fantastic for Terrestrial archetypes, Jamming Tower, one of our crucial means of disrupting tools right now, Town Store is one of the ways you can get lots of tools available, Pokemon League Headquarters can disrupt some basic attacking decks, a couple more A-Specs, the Grand Tree and the Neutralization Zone. Grand Tree, pretty decent for stage 2s, can get around Budew. Neutralization Zone is another way that you can can be disruptive for an opponent. And then we have a handful of sort of the less core stadium cards, but still relevant ones. Mezagoza is coin flips, but can still be beneficial. Beach Court is another way to help pivot your Pokemon. Academy at Night, definitely strong if you're looking at the Slowking archetype, could still be useful for some lightning decks. Gravity Mountain is effectively a damage mod available to you. The Cycling Road, pretty decent. We are lacking a lot of discard synergy right now. Perilous Jungle could be good if you're trying to poison your opponents, especially with something like Brute Bonnet, now that we've lost the Hisui and Radiant Sneasler. Calamitous Wasteland can be disruptive. Moonlit Hill, decent for the God of War archetypes. And the Full Metal Lab can offset some math for the opponent. And it's screenshot time before we move on. And of course, we're ending on Special Energy. Again, there are some A-specs to look at here. Legacy Energy is still a really powerful effect. It's a rainbow-style energy, but you give up one fewer prize card when you're KO'd. Neo Upper, only for Stage 2s, but is effectively energy acceleration. And the Enriching Energy does allow some extra consistency, some draw power, and there are even some situations where you can get multiple uses of this effect and really build a draw engine around this. Special energy we have in the game right now is Jet Energy and Luminous Energy. Jet Energy providing some great mobility. Luminous, great for having flexible attacking options within your deck. And then we have a handful of other things here. Reversal Energy, great if you're playing an evolving archetype that has some non-EX and V Pokemon within it to provide a huge boost of acceleration all in one attachment. And then there are some other decent utility colorless energy that are worth considering as well. Let's shift over to Pokemon then, and we're going to start with a bunch of supporting Pokemon that no matter what sort of archetype you're playing, these Pokemon are going to show up time and time again within these decks because they're basically really helpful at drawing cards or have other utility within them. We'll start off with some of the basic EXs then. Squawkabilly EX can get you going in the game early. Pheasantipity, great for recovering and bouncing back from suffering KOs. Mew X has that free retreat, so is naturally a decent pivot. It can find a way to attack and can top you up on cards when you're being hit by Iono in the late game. Teal Mask Ogopon provides energy acceleration, especially with Energy Switch as a combo. It still has decent type coverage as an attacking threat, and you continue to cycle cards whenever you are using a Teal Dance. And the Latias EX is a great way to give your basic Pokemon freedom of retreat. Then we have this huge suite of colorless Pokemon, which are really enabled by the Fan Call from Fan Rotom. This is a phenomenal ability that makes a lot of these Pokemon much more viable, actually. Noctowl's Dual Seeker is amazing for Terrestrial archetypes. The Dunsparce, especially with more Artisan coming in the format, is a way to continue drawing cards with that Runaway Draw. Pidgeot EX, still a really powerful Stage 2 that we have access to. And whenever you're playing Rare Candy in your deck, you have to think whether or not it's worth adding this Pidgeot. And the Transformative Start Ditto, actually pretty reasonable when you have Fan Call at your disposal to search this out of the deck quickly and then get the Ditto into the active position. Suddenly you can be turning that into any other Pokemon within your deck. The sort of more fringe colorless stuff include Pelipper, which can actually search for supporter cards. Now that we lose Lumineon V, that's going to become much more relevant, but at the same time it can also recover supporters from your discard pile. And again, we used to have the Banette in format that could do that a little bit more stably. Now possibly Pelipper fits a niche that isn't otherwise covered in the format. A pretty powerful card that has yet to see play. And Dodrio can be an attacking presence whilst also drawing cards along the way. And then just a couple helpful basics here as well, the Tatsugiri and the Cleffer. The Attract customers can be a great way to cherry pick supporters, not just in the early game to get you going, but also give you a bit of protection from late game hand disruption. And the Cleffer, if you can get it into the active, you can end on a really nice hand size, which is still a decent card to have within your decks, just as a pivot when you have the Buddy Buddy Poffin available to you anyway. There are, of course, more supporting Pokemon. These are less focused on draw and more focused on powerful effects. We start off with Dustobar, a very scary card to have in the format, where you can pick apart your opponent's board with damage counters or by cleanly KOing them with Curse Blast. Badoo, a really important baby Pokemon that we have in the format that can item lock opponents for 0 energy, and it also has naturally free retreat, so it can be splashed into all sorts of archetypes. Monkey Dory, also a card that's finding its way into so many decks, actually, with that Adrenobrain being so fantastic at countering some key strategies in the format right now, whilst doing some math fixing on your own end. And Iron Bundle's Hyper Blower ability is a great way to push Pokemon out of the active spot to give yourself a slightly easier prize map if your opponent is throwing up a walling Pokemon or something simply too tanky to deal with. Or if they're trying to force a single prize attacking threat at you, you can use this Iron Bundle effectively to fix your prize map. We have some interesting basic abilities here. Mimikyu is a difficult Pokemon to KO and forces certain attackers into you. The Klefki can shut down a huge portion of basic abilities with that Mischievous Lock. And the Fluttermane's Midnight Fluttering is a bit more limited than the Klefki, but can be an attacking presence in a number of decks as well. Then we have the poison stuff. Brute Bonnet can poison both active Pokemon, which is pretty handy. The Petron improves that poison damage output, and essentially you can end your turn rather than attacking, utilizing this ability. And the Petron EX can be great for mobility of your dark Pokemon, but also could be another poison enabler in the format. We have a couple really important EXs in here. Blood Moon Ursaluna gets so cheap to attack with as the game progresses, and that Blood Moon is a really decent damage output option. The Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon not only has an annoying inbuilt ability itself, which can make it difficult to deal with for certain archetypes, but its own attack actually wall breaks as well, so you can use this as a means of getting around other walling Pokemon in the format. We have some pretty important Stage 1 Pokemon. I think Xatu is worth picking up just because that Psychic Energy attack cost is becoming more universal. With Dragapult being so huge, Lily's Clefairy being more popular as well. There's the Slowking archetype. There's a number of decks where I'm considering this already as a Stage 1 line. The Rabsca is a far cry from Manaphy, but it can still give you some bench protection for spread attacks and even damage counter placement. And Revavroom, yet to see too much play, but still can be a means of discarding energy from hand now that we've lost Radiant Greninja, whilst also topping up on a decent amount of cards. Quick note on Hawlucha, that flying entry is still a powerful effect that can set up bench damage. And then we have a suite of other important basic abilities here. Relicanth is certainly relevant for Feraligatr and Archaludon still. Skwovet can be utilized alongside some other ability Pokemon to keep drawing through the deck and refreshing a hand. The Genesect can turn off Ace Specs for the opponent, and Morpeko, once again, hasn't seen a huge amount of play just yet, but in the previous format we had so many ways of discarding cards. Now, ideally, the Morpeko can provide a bit more synergy. Because now we're going to have a quick mention of the format in Japan, because of course not only are we having a rotation, but also we're introducing the new expansion Journey Together at a very similar time as well here. So on the left, we have the top 16 of the 5,000 player Champions League tournament in this format, as well as on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the sort of popularity of these archetypes that are making top cuts, as well as a recent tier list from Pokeka Book. Once again, based on the City League tournament results, which are relatively similar to our League Cups over here in the West. You'll notice that not only are there archetypes that you already know, but also there are some new ones popping up. Lily's Clefairy, En Zoroark, Hop Zacian. These are new archetypes that we will be discussing later on in the channel in a little bit more detail. And in fact, I'm going to be doing a full buy list for that expansion in the very next video, so keep an eye out for that. But of course, we are going to do a quick teaser of Journey Together here as well. The En Zoroark deck definitely looks like a powerful one. Having trade at your disposal once again is strong. Darmanitan also provides a great spread attack option. Lily's Clefairy is just a really powerful attacking threat. It can deal with Dragapult. Not many things can for such an efficient attack cost. And there's that very powerful Lily's Pearl tool card that can turn Clefairy into a single prize Pokemon. Hop's deck has a lot of supporting cards. The Postwick, the Choice Band, and the Snorlax all provide damage mod. Cramorant is a very powerful single prize attacking option. Hop's Double is a gust effect on an ability, and the Hop Zacian has a really efficient close cleave attack that can be early game spread, and the Brave Slash with enough acceleration either via Metang or via the Archaludon could be a powerful option as well. The Iono's archetype doesn't look hugely playable, but could certainly still be a fun one with Electro Streamer powering up Lightning Energy, and we know there are some other Pokemon that can really take advantage of this as well, be it Raging Bolt EX, be it Iron Hands EX as well. Of course, you're attaching to your Iono's Pokemon, but we can find ways of manipulating those energy to other threats. And then just some standalone decent cards. The Volcanion EX is a decent modifier. Could be really strong in any archetype that has Latias EX already in it. So you can just start your turn going into Volcanion, burning the opponent, then shifting into an attacker. It's effectively a plus 20 damage mod for you with that guaranteed burn. And it could be a way that you could play around Pheasantipity EX for certain attacks. And then Mamoswine, a pretty powerful Stage 2 Pokemon, has high hit points, has that really helpful inbuilt ability. Yes, its attack takes a lot to get going in terms of how many things you need to already have set up, but certainly Mamoswine's ability helps you get there, and ultimately you're going to be putting more support Pokemon on your bench that you're trying to evolve up. With that quick primer on Journey Together, let's have a look at what are probably the best decks in the game and then start talking about the cards that we should be picking up here. First of all, Dragapult. We know that the Dracloak has a fantastic ability that can cycle through the game. There's actually going to be a number of decks that have thin Dragapult packages just because Dracloak provides extra draw and we lose so much of that draw power from rotation that this is probably just the next best thing that we have. And in some instances, decks will just find a way to get that Dragapult attacking. Still one of the most powerful attackers that we have available in the game. Then we have have Charizard, still really powerful, of course. We can get that internal energy acceleration that can help with other attacking Pokemon, but of course the Burning Darkness still powerful, especially when we get towards the later stages of the game. Archaladon EX, still just a really overstated Stage 1 Pokemon. Again, it can self-accelerate, which makes it still very low maintenance and easy to work with. Then we have Golden Go, again, a great inbuilt ability where you're able to draw cards off it that can help you accumulate those energy turn by turn with the Make It Rain attack, which can lead to huge one-hit KOs, even into Stage 2 Pokemon. We have a suite of really important basic Terrestrial EX Pokemon. Wellspring Ogerpon EX, a very dangerous threat with that Torrential Pump. Many archetypes are trying to weave this in with Crispin, with Sparkling Crystal, because there is much less bench protection in format with Manaphy gone. Pikachu EX still has that burst of 300 damage, and its inbuilt very frustrating ability, making it more difficult for certain archetypes to KO it. And Terapagos EX, yes, we lose double turbo energy, but you still can try and power this up for the unified beatdowns when need be, and even look towards that Crown Opal attack, because there is crossover with the energies that you're already seeing on the Pikachu and the Wellspring Ogerpon. Sometimes that Crown Opal attack will even start coming up in a few more games. Another powerful basic attacker is Raging Bolt EX. It's looking more likely that it's going alongside the Noctowl package. And there's also a handful of single prize Pokemon that you can weave in as well. The Raging Bolt, the Koraidon, and the Slitherwing. It's also looking like walling Pokemon are a huge headache. The Totodile and Croconaw both have very powerful attacks. That corner option with the Big Bite and the Reverse Thrust helping you move your Feraligatr to the bench, whilst using that Torrential Heart ability, pushing the damage output of your Totodile and Croconaw, of course, if you're copying via Relicanth. And then it enables Monkey Dory for yourself as well, whilst you're trying to protect your Feraligatrs, especially if you're using that Croconaw attack, by throwing these annoying walling Pokemon into the active. And don't forget, the Giant Wave can still deal huge damage output when you are using that Torrential Heart ability, so it can end up being a late-game wall breaker when need be. Some of the annoying walling Pokemon that can go in for Alligator, but also can just be the face of their own archetype, include the Milotic EX as well as that Farigiraf EX. Both warning against different things, but cover a huge array of matchups, and are definitely worth considering and teching against in this new format, because they are certainly covering a wide range of decks. So being aware of these threats are really integral. And then let's move on to possible threats in the format. These aren't necessarily the top contenders from the City Leagues, but can still certainly represent some powerful archetypes. Screamtail and Drifloon, still some of the most powerful single prize Pokemon we can work with, especially with those tool buffs. And of course, we still have Psychic Embrace in the format. Yes, we lose the Refinement Curlier. That was one of the best reasons to play Gardevoir in the first place. But at the end of the day, it still combines nicely with Monkey Dory, and we still have those really important one prize Pokemon. Then we have the Evolutions. I think this hasn't really had that time to shine just yet in Standard, but with so many powerful cards leaving the format and this engine being essentially untouched, opens the door a little bit more for that Flareon to be a much more focal point of a strong attacker in the game right now, where that Burning Charge can accelerate some energy, whilst the Carnelian can deal a real decent chunk of damage. The Leafeon and Sylveon somewhat are helping with type coverage here, but also have some great utility attacks. And both abilities on the Eevee and EVEX, of course, being a basic Terrestrial, just generally is helpful for the deck because that unlocks your Noctowl engine, but there's a lot of synergy going on within this list. Then there's Ceruledge. Yes, it can still be a ridiculous beat stick if you are willing to put enough basic energy within your deck. There's the Lightning stuff. It does lose a number of its attacking suite, but still, at its core, having Miraidon, having Iron Hand, still very dangerous, and that Magneton is still a fantastic ability to lean into for some guaranteed acceleration to go alongside those generators. Slowking, a really interesting Stage 1 Pokemon that can utilize some of the strongest attacks in the game. Regigigas, Conkeldurr, Kyurem, that gives you options to spread, as well as have really high damage output at your disposal. It does require a bit of setup for that Seek Inspiration to come off, but it can come together for some ridiculous plays. Blissey EX had that surprising finish at Fukuoka, so definitely one to still consider. It's a tanky Pokemon, it deals a decent amount of damage, it has a great inbuilt ability. Blissey does just tick a lot of boxes in the format right now, so might be worth building around. And then just a final nod to the future stuff. There's the Iron Valiant, which we can still try and move in and out of the active for those Tachyon Bits damage mods. The Iron Crown EX, much more limited to the future Pokemon, but of course we still have Iron Hands, we still have Iron Thorns. These are still really powerful attackers to bounce between, of course. And with enough Iron Crowns, you can make that Miraidon capable of KOing basic Pokemon quite happily, whilst accelerating at the same time, beginning to take those prize cards and setting you up for the rest of the game. Whilst not forgetting that Miraidon could even start powering itself up, because of course it's a single prize Pokemon. Your opponent isn't always incentivized to attack into it, and might be gusting around it, then you can punish by having Psychic Energy within your deck, and making that second attack of Miraidon count as well. Thanks so much for watching today's video. Don't worry, check the description down below for all those card names, and set numbers. It's going to be laid out quite nicely for you. So I'm hoping it makes it a lot easier for you to just copy paste that stuff if you're going to put them into your own spreadsheets, or if you're going to start searching online to find some singles. That's still the cheapest way for you to sort of gather your competitive cards together compared to just opening booster packs, even though that's a lot of fun. Even if you're not looking to buy cards, hopefully this helps you sort your collection when you are dealing with the rotating cards and thinking about which ones are still worth keeping around. All those cards that you have to do some bulk diving for. I've just gone looking for Slow Kings and Slow Pokes myself. Let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video where we're going to be doing the Journey Together buy list, so you don't want to miss it. Cheers.